I am from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm a doctoral candidate. And I'm going to be talking to you about some research that I did while I was an intern last summer at Google in California. Now, when I got there, aside from enjoying the copious amounts of free food and massage chairs and free volleyball courts and free exercise rooms, I actually had to do some work. And what they asked me to do was investigate the barriers to entry for visually impaired users, the 161 million of them across the world, into adopting new types of applications. And this is a very broad question to ask. And so what I did was I went out into the general community and I conducted 5 two-hour-long interviews with members of the visually impaired community in Northern California. And just to investigate, find out what types of software they use, how they get online, how they adopt and adapt to the ever-changing computer world. And here are some of the responses that we got from them. And if you look at them, they're really not things that you would be unexpected to see for a typical user. Classes or tutorials are useful for learning new computer software. That there's a large ramp-up time when starting to use new software. You have to trial and error to try to figure out how to get these crazy things to work. And also, one user described having a guardian angel. That person that sits right next to you that says, oh, you're trying to find out how to do this. Well, you know, this is how to get it done. You click here, you go there, and this is how you access that feature. So these are all kind of expected. But one thing that they said which was not expected from a typical user's point of view is that they required memorization of both the key commands and the layout of any new application, be it a web application or a desktop application that they might be using. So let's, for example, say we use, Gmail. So this is my Gmail account, and as you can see, it's fairly well laid out. You've got some settings and links at the top of the page. Along the left-hand side, you have the folder list, you have your chat list, and in the middle of the page, you have the entire list of emails that you have. This is very visually easy for us to take in and process all simultaneously. But let me show you what someone who's visually impaired sees when they go to Gmail.
Gmail-inbox left parent 2278 right parent gmail.com page has 4 frames, 6 headings and 104 links. Gmail-inbox left parent 2278 right parent gmail.com empty frame copyright 2002-2009 empty frame and empty frame inbox empty frame and empty frame empty frame and main frame. Gmail link calendar link documents link photos link legal link web link more black down point and triangle gmail.com vertical bar same page link settings vertical bar.
So as you can hear, or what you heard was something called a screen reader. This converts a web page from images, text, links, headers, and tables into audio or braille content that someone who's visually impaired can't rely on the computer screen can actually take in and process. But because of the nature of audio itself, it's serial. You have to go through this page in a linear fashion. Screen readers start in the top left-hand corner and move left to right, top to bottom, going from each element by element, reading where there are links, where there are just plain text, and where there are pictures. And while this is really nice, you can imagine that I now have to memorize where everything is on the page. I need to remember that, the links to the folder lists are like the 3rd header down on the page. Or to go through all the emails, I have to remember where they're located. This takes a lot of time and is very cumbersome for these users. Whereas us as visually impaired, visually capable individuals, we can actually just process the whole page. We can see everything simultaneously. So when we're adopting new applications, we normally go to online forums or tutorials. These are incredibly helpful for us to adopt new software. They outline how to get access to all the features, but one of the things that they do is they rely very, very heavily on pictures. I mean, consider this one example. Hey, if you want to get this feature to work, all you need to do is click on that checkbox. See, we have an arrow pointing to this picture of a checkbox. Well, if I'm visually impaired, I can't see the picture. I can't get access to that information. And here's another example. If you want to create a new folder, I think this is, or a new filter, it's right there. See, we've circled it. I can't see that. I don't have any information as a visually impaired individual. I can't access that data, which makes online tutorials really inaccessible and difficult to use. But moreover, when we use a tutorial on the computer, we actually have our application where we're trying to apply the techniques on one side of our screen. And simultaneously, on the other side of the screen, we have 3, 4, 5, 6 other windows from the tutorials that we're going back and forth from, reading something, applying it, reading something, applying it. But as a visually impaired individual, we can't do that very easily. We can't see these things simultaneously. And what compounds the problem is screen readers, all be them fantastic new technologies, actually can make you lose your place. So where I might be at chapter 4 of a tutorial, when I switch to the web application and then switch back, it's not uncommon that I would jump back up to the top and you go, damn, where was I in that tutorial? I now need to find my place again and to resume the learning process before I can even try applying it again. So based off of those 5 initial user interviews, as well as the findings of analyzing how tutorials work online with screen readers, we came up with a set of new tutorial requirements that work, we hoped, very well for the visually impaired community. So the first idea was to do embedded content. What if we directly injected the tutorial content into the web application? So instead of having to switch between multiple windows, multiple browsers, what you would get is the tutorial content right next to the inbox, if that's what you're learning about, or the folders list, or whatever the web application has. The second requirement that we had was to create interactive and dynamic content. So many users might not want to go through a tutorial from top to bottom. They might want to read chapter 1, then chapter 4, then 7, then 2. Well, in a traditional HTML tutorial where it's linear, they have to go from the top, chapter 1, chapter 2, and they actually have to read in that order or try to jump around. Well, what if the tutorial lent itself to reading in the order that you chose to? In other words, could you browse the table of contents first and jump from chapter to chapter as you needed to get access to that information? Also, used audio-based content. And while a screen reader does create audio for someone to take in, there are many types of HTML that we can use that's easier for a screen reader to parse, and therefore easier for a screen reader user to understand. For example, bulleted lists. Those are really easy to traverse. Or giving them warnings when we move their focus around the page, or here's the beginning of the tutorial and here's the end of this chapter of the tutorial. Putting these audio-based markers in makes these types of tutorials much more easy to use and therefore accessible. And the last point is one that I'm not going to cover in detail in this talk. There are a lot of issues when using Web 2.0 applications and screen readers. We published a paper this spring at WWW, and we covered in excruciating detail all of these problems and some solutions to help overcome these problems. So I would encourage you to look at that paper if you would like more detail. So, based on all of this information, we created a fully functional implementation of these design requirements called DTorial. DTorial was built using a user-centered design model. We had 4 iterative rounds of design, including 17 different users, so there was 3 to 4 per round. DTorial was built using JavaScript, but it was done using GreaseMonkey. So we were able to do everything in the front end of the web browser, and it was not that difficult for us. So somebody who is developing a web application can have even an easier time if they were doing it behind the scenes, because they can have access to how the DOM is supposed to look and modify and put markers in to make their life that much easier. One user responded this way to DTorial. The interactive tutorial is a very smoothly integrated environment for learning and getting your task accomplished. I think they are both good, referring to DTorial and traditional HTML tutorials, but I think the learning curve